Cup and the league all to be won. Everyone knows there's a job to be done, and with a team so fine, I'm proud they're mine. We'll be singing this song. For real bars of family athletic, and now we are on song. For real bars of family athletic, and we'll go marching on.
The Dunfermline Athletic Former Players Association podcast is sponsored by Starnut Apparel. Affordable and stylish clothing born on the terraces. Just head to www.starnutapparel.co.uk.
Hello and welcome back to Walking Down the Holbeath Road, the podcast brought to you by the Dunfermline Athletic Former Players Association. This is the podcast where we celebrate the people, the moments and the memories that make Dunfermline Athletic Football Club so special. In this episode, we were joined by a true legend of Scottish football, a voice that narrated our childhoods and some of the greatest chapters in our game's history. He's an award-winning broadcaster, author, and the most recognisable voice in Scottish sport. It's our absolute honour to welcome Archie Macpherson to the podcast. We'll be talking about his journey from the classroom to the commentary box, his memories of iconic matches, and of course Dunfermline Athletic, his thoughts on today's game, and where he learned his lessons most from a lifetime behind the microphone. It was an interesting chat, this one, and to hear about Archie's career and memories of Dunfermline Athletic was truly special. To learn his first European game as a broadcaster was at East End Park. His first European goal he witnessed was Harry Melrose, and his first Scottish Cup final commentating was Dunfermline versus Hearts in 1968. We'd like to put on record our thanks to the Garvick House Hotel for letting us record on the day and providing an outstanding lunch. So Pars fans, sit tight and enjoy this one as we walk down the Holbeath Road with the legend that is Archie Macpherson.
But football without fans is nothing. You play a football match without fans, you've got nothing. It can be the greatest game in the world. If there are no people there to watch it, it becomes nothing.
Welcome to Walking Down Holbeath Road, an absolute icon of Scottish football. It's an absolute honour and privilege to see you again. Archie Macpherson. How are we, Archie?
I'm fine. I'd like to thank the lady, young lady in Dunfermline, because I got lost coming from the edge of Glasgow. When I got into Dunfermline, my sat-nav started to argue with me, I think. And I stopped her and she said, well, I'll look at my phone. Then she said, I said to her, would you like to come in? And, you know, in this day and age, young ladies have to be very careful. She said, no, I'll certainly come. And she drove me all the way, she directed me all the way to where I'm now sitting. So Kathleen is her name. Kathleen, wherever you are, if you ever hear this, thank you very much indeed for getting me here. So that's how we started. And it's a delight to be in this lovely place, this lovely hotel. And I was completely overwhelmed by the hospitality I got at the Dunfermline Partick Thistle game, where my brother-in-law George and I were your guests. Not only, the game was not particularly good from Dunfermline's point of view, but the community, the sense of community that was there, and the way the club had organised at that level, people who are willing to come in and be entertained more than just a pie and a cup of tea. And the meal I got there, George and I were astonished. It was, top class, 5-star. And I'll use that to go back to the very beginning to say, why should I be surprised about coming to Dunfermline and seeing this? Because there still exists in me what was there as a boy, because I was born and brought up in the East End of Glasgow. And if you're born and brought up at the East End of Glasgow, and there are only two teams that really matter in life. Nothing else exists out the city of Glasgow. Partick Thistle was even foreign to me, even though it's in Maryhill and I was in Jefferson. So Dunfermline, Airdrie, Motherwell, they were nothing to us. There were only two teams that really existed in that sense. And the first time I really broke out of that kind of mentality was when, because we slightly moved outside the Glasgow boundary, and I had to go to school in Lallershire, and I went to school in Cobridge. And I learned there was a great rivalry then between Albion Rovers and Airdrie. So I went to the local derbies I never knew existed. And in these days, we're talking back to when Airdrie played at Broomfield. I can't remember the name of the ground they play in now, it doesn't matter. But then it was Broomfield with a little tiny pavilion they had that was like a cricket pavilion. And I watched in one game Ian McMillan and Jock Stein playing against each other, would you believe? No, at that stage, I didn't know who they were. Jock Stein certainly was just a big guy I saw kicking the ball with his left foot, couldn't use his right foot and so on. And Ian McMillan was a lovely wee player, shoving passes. They were nothing to me then. Of course, if I say the names now, we all know who they were, of what they grew into be. Stein, the great manager, Ian McMillan, the wee Prime Minister, and so on. But it was Airdrie and Albion Rovers, nothing to do with the old firm at all. And we were queuing up to get in. At Broomfield, you know, all this, I think it was about maybe 18,000 it could take in those days. And so it was incredible for me to see this kind of football, because I was brought up watching Shettleston Juniors, and I saw Tommy Docherty making his debut for Shettleston Juniors. He played 5 times for them before Celtic saw the greatness in him. And they signed him, so I only saw him playing these games. And I used to follow Shettleston Juniors when they played fairly locally, like Vale of Clyde and teams like that. So Shettleston Juniors was my start in football. And I grew from there into loving the game as a whole. And Shettleston as an area it gave me an insight into the world at large, because it was a fairly downtrodden area. I lived in a tenement at Born 771, Shettleston Road, tiny wee house. And I thought to myself, where am I going to go in life? And if somebody had told me sitting in there what eventually I would come to be, you know, I wouldn't have believed them. So there I was in the East End of Glasgow and loving football. And as I pointed out, the old firm were the teams that we were interested in there in particular. And I studied at school, became eventually a teacher. And I taught in the East End, and I taught in Mallochshire itself. And all the time I was playing football, amateur football, played for Lochwinnoch amateurs, and very interested in the amateur game at that stage. And then I played for Queen's Park's third 11, which was called the Hampden 11. And I played with a man whose name you might not remember, Davy Latham. Davy Latham played for Queen's Park and went to Rangers. He was a school teacher, gym teacher, and he's part-time. And in a practice game, I actually injured him. A big raw lady raddy. I went in wildly and I injured Davy Latham. And, he never actually played again. He played, but this injury that he got...
So you're to blame for his career not taking off.
So I've been claimed to have used him. Well, it's a pretty negative claim, but there we are. So eventually I was very interested. And what I have to stress here is, from the word go, I always wanted to be a writer. Nothing to do with football. I just simply wanted to be a writer. And in school, Coleridge High School, I was the editor of the school newspaper. And I started, just after I left school, to send short stories all over the place to different magazines and so on. And I'm afraid they came back, as somebody once said, the rejection slips like ping pong balls on the other side of the net. And I wasn't really getting on very far. And then one day I was sitting in my future wife's house, my fiance's house, and I opened the Evening Times, which was a very prominent paper in those days, like all papers. It struggles now. And they used to have two editions. They had a white edition for early Saturday, leisurely reading, travel guides and things like that, and short stories. And I owned this newspaper. They had the pink edition at night with all the football and results. I up this paper and sitting there, and there was my short story that I'd written. So that was the first thing I saw in public, a short story I'd written, and it was in the Evening Times. And from then, that encouraged me. I was, as a teacher, walked in on a teacher once, and she was practicing an nativity play in the school. And I was interested in what was happening, and I saw that the third shepherd was arguing with the Virgin Mary and sort of, and absolute chaos in this nativity play. And I'm back and I thought, I think I'll write something about that. So I wrote a piece for a morning, I had in mind a morning BBC programme. And I sent the piece to them, and lo and behold, they phoned me back. I gave them a phone number. And he said, yeah, but come in and read it to us. So I came in and read it to them, and that encouraged me to sit down and think about writing a short story for the BBC full-time, a full short story for a bigger programme. And I got a call from Jimmy Crancy, was Bob Crancy. Remember Bob Crancy?
Of course, yeah.
Jimmy Crancy was Bob Crancy's uncle. And he was the head of talks and drama at the BBC. And he said, I like your short story. Would you come in and read it? Because I was sitting in the school one day and looking out, and I saw an Indian with a turban, a salesman trying to sell brushes round the houses. And a wee boy was bothering him, following him. So I wrote a short story about how the wee boy helped him to sell a brush, his first brush. And they loved that short story. So while I was in there, he said, read it to me. So I read it to him. He says, I think I'll get an actor to read this, to do it properly. And he got a man called Michael Elder from Edinburgh. How could an Edinburgh man read a story about a mining village in Marsh? It just wasn't right. So the second one I sent him, I insisted, can I read it? So he brought me in, and as I was reading this story, I saw a man coming in and looking at me through the glass window. And when I walked back out, he said, I've just been listening to you with a good voice. He said, you interested in football? I said, yeah, of course. And I told him the kind of fragile background of football I had. And he said, he said, could you go to a game and come in and read it to us? And I said, yeah, sure, I'll do that. So I thought, what will I do? Would I do Shepperson Juniors, for example, and give a nice, colourful background, including my neighbourhood and everything else? And I thought, no, I'll give them the Old Firm. So I went to Parkhead, an Old Firm game, and I came back in and read that to him and said, yeah, that's fine. We'll get back to you. And they phoned me one day and said, right, yes, we'd like you to do a game for us. If you can get to Douglas Park, Hamilton, and do that, cover that game for us. Now, it so happened that it was the 22nd of October, and you may not recognize that date in particular, but it was a very, very historical date, because as I was traveling in the red bus to Douglas Park, Hamilton, a U-2 spy plane was being shot down over Cuba. And the papers and the radio and the television were full of, we're on the verge of a world war. So I was thinking to myself, it's either the end of the world or Hamilton against Stennismuir. Which is it likely to be? So I went and I did the game. I came in, and as I went into the old BBC building, it's no longer there. It was a charming, elegant old house in the west of Glasgow. Who did I bump into coming out? He having done his bit, but Bill McLaren, the famous rugby commentator, who said, hello, are you into... I said, it's my first. So he said, well, good luck to you. And he shook my hand. Bill McLaren. So I'm an Emma who's nervous as hell. And I read this piece, and he said, oh, it's not just that for radio, you're going on telly. So I couldn't believe this. And I thought, did they give you any help? So they plopped me in front of a camera. And they said, we'll give you a sign and just tell us. So these programs that you would watch around about 5 o'clock at night, you know, the grandstand programs, there I was. And I gave a report on Hamilton against Stennismuir. And that really was me started.
And you were still teaching at this point as well?
I was still teaching, yes. I was part-time. I had then become a headmaster of a school in Marshall. And the boys, of course, when they saw me on television, suddenly they gave me more respect in the school than I ever had. They thought, well, a teacher, but on telly.
So they're famous.
So that was it. And here is the connection with Dunfermline, because they liked what I was doing. Obviously, they liked the quality of my voice and the way I wrote stuff and so on. So they very quickly got me into the swing of things. So I was doing a lot of stuff, and they phoned me once and said, look, we know you're still teaching. He said, are you all right for Wednesday night or whatever night it was? I can't remember exactly which night it was. You'll know yourself from Dunfermline history. He said, we'll let you up to Dunfermline and do a radio report and do any interviews for us. I said, what's the game? It was the 19th of December, 62. He says, it's Dunfermline against Valencia. I thought, oh, European game, wow. So I didn't have a car. I can't remember now how I got to Dunfermline. I must have taken several routes to get there, but I got there because I was anxious to get involved in a European occasion. And when I got to Dunfermline, it was freezing cold. And I thought, I wonder if this game is going to go on. So I got in to Dunfermline and I showed my BBC pass, and I was able to go right through, because I think there was a discussion about whether the game was actually going to go on or not. And then I saw Jock Stein for the first time. Now, I'd heard about Jock Stein. I'd seen him playing as a player, but as a manager, I knew nothing about him. But there he was, and he was on the edge of the pitch with the referee. And I could see by the way he was handling the referee that the referee wouldn't get out of Dunfermline collide, and he cancelled the game. He wanted that game playing because he knew Valencia would hate playing in these conditions. They'd been beaten, as you know, 2-0 in the first leg. Now, of course, I can't claim to remember everything about the game. I've noted one or two names just to remind me of it, and I can't remember all the details of the game. But I know that Harry Melrose scored the first game I ever described in Europe, when he scored the opening goal for Dunfermline. And thereafter, what I can remember is this amazing game. I'm not saying this to patronise you, as I said at your lunch recently. It was one of the most amazing games I ever saw in my career. Think of it. A provincial team, and I use that word provincial not to disparage you, but you know, that was in our mind. A provincial team led Dunfermline taking on Valencia, one of the great teams of Europe, and scoring 6 goals against them. And very unfortunately giving away that late goal, which had to take it to a replay. So I sat, and the ground was absolutely packed. And I realized that you could create an atmosphere that was just as innovating, just as thrilling, just as impressive as watching a game at Celtic Park or Ibrox. It was the first time I really felt here at Dunfermline that there could be a challenge to the Big Two in Glasgow in terms of the interest and so on. And then, of course, I was disappointed that Dunfermline eventually lost out. But the other interesting thing about it was, because I was able to speak to Dunfermline players in later years, I remember Willie Cunningham, whom you'll know, of course, know about. I think he's gone.
He is, unfortunately, yeah.
And I remember talking to Willie Cunningham many years after. I think I was writing a book at the time. And he said to me, which was, I found astonishing, he said he had a big argument with Jock Stein before the first City game against Everton. And I said, what was it about? He said, I was a defender, but he said, he came to me and he said, I want you to do something different tonight. He said, I want you to play behind the other defenders. And I want you to move across and look for gaps and look for sudden breakthroughs and so on. And he said, no, I don't understand what you're talking about. He said, no. So he had this argument with Jock Stein. Then in reflection, talking to me about this for the book I was writing, he said, do you know, I think this was the first occasion in Scottish football that a sweeper was used, because that was the role I was actually playing. And Jock Stein was there to describe to me for the first time how to play this role. So that shows you the great impact, of course, that Stein had, not just in Dunfermline, but in the Scottish game as a whole. Now, I remember when I travelled the world with Jock Stein, we stopped on our way to New Zealand. We stopped in San Francisco overnight. And we were met there by a Celtic supporter who was going to show us around the city. And as we were sitting down having a cup of tea, Stein was a great teetotaler, and that's all he drank. This Celtic supporter said to him, how did you feel as a Dunfermline manager beating Celtic? You're a great team. And that 1961 Cup final, did you not feel sad about it? He said, come on, for God's sake. He said, I'm a manager of a team. I didn't give a bugger about Celtic. I wanted to beat them. And so this took the Celtic supporter aback. But he was a man, manager of Dunfermline, who was obviously a lover of Celtic, you know, for what they had done to him, improved, saved his professional life and so on. He said, no, I was a manager of Dunfermline. That came first before anything else. And that was the impression you got from Stein all the time. So that occasion, winning the cup for Dunfermline, and then doing that great effort against Valencia, I'll always remember. That it gave me an insight into how another club that I knew very little about could succeed professionally. So thereafter came George Farm. Now, I was very fortunate in being able to work during that period. I'm sure that I don't know if you'll be able to tell me whether there are many arguments in comparing Stein with George Farm, because George Farm took you to the semi-final of a European trophy, which is more than Stein did, and so on. And I knew George Farm. I knew him in different ways. First of all, I knew George as manager of Dunfermline, and I interviewed him once or twice and talked to him. I also saw him because he went into broadcasting later on in life, and I remember talking to him at events as a broadcaster. He was an entirely different man from Stein. And I don't know whether he was consciously trying to be different from Stein or not, because Stein was, in essence, a wee bit like Sir Alec. He could suddenly change in personality in seconds. George, as I can recollect, was calmer, a wee bit cooler. Of course, I wasn't in the dressing room with him, so I don't know what it was like there. And of course, George Farm was there in what was, again, remember, my first European game was Dunfermline. My first European goal was Harry Melrose. And my first Scottish Cup final was Dunfermline. 1968, the cup final against Hearts.
We are Flow Digital Pharmacy, and we are proud to sponsor the Walking Down the Holbeath Road podcast. Our easy-to-use app is a convenient way to access your NHS prescription medication, and our team of trained pharmacists are helping thousands of people to access the support and medication they need. If you're registered with a GP who's based in England, you can use the Flow app to securely and conveniently send them NHS medication requests and arrange delivery to a location of your choice at a time that suits you. This means you can avoid the hassle of contacting your GP and making unnecessary round trips to eventually collect your prescription. Find out more at weareflow, spelled PHLO, that's weareflow.com.
Now, that was strange for me. I was nervous as hell. He was my first Scottish Cup final, and I wasn't sure how to attack it. I didn't know the teams as well because I'd been following, because of BBC, they go for the biggest audience. They were following Rangers and Celtic virtually all the time. Whereas here I was with Hearts and Dunfermline. Teams I knew about, but not as much as the Old Firm. So that made me nervous. I was also nervous because I'd made a big blunder in front of a television camera one night when I said, good evening, the two games tonight are from Hambley and Wemden. And a spoonerism. And I felt hellish about that, nervous, went home. But somebody there came to me a couple of days later and said, no, don't worry about that. That famous golf commentator, Henry Longhurst, you should have heard his spoonerism with Coles and Hunt coming down the fairway at St Andrews. So that made me feel a wee bit better. So I went into this cup final, and it was a good game. I mean, Hearts were the better team in the first half, as I can recollect. I think there was no scoring in that first half. But then Dunfermline took over, and they had some great players. And let me just go back to Jock Stein for a minute, and that conversation in San Francisco with that Celtic supporter and saying, yeah, I was a Dunfermline manager, which came first. The man he talked about most of all was Eddie Conaghan. And Eddie Conaghan's performance in the cup final because Celtic battered them with everything, and Connaughton was really outstanding. Well, he wasn't, because it was bent to Martin that played in that Scottish Cup final. But I remember the two Callaghan brothers that played in that final. I met them in later life. And of course, I think it was Tommy Callaghan that eventually played for Celtic. And curiously enough, I don't know why, he wasn't a terribly popular player with Celtic. I don't quite understand it. And the others, Roy Barry, of course, I met Roy once or twice, and a very, very steady player, reliable player. And all in all, a marvellous team. But the player, I suppose, that attracted me more than anything else was Alec Edwards. And Alec Edwards, as you know, Sinclair, made their debuts. Alec Edwards, can you imagine if I was playing a 16-year-old in that game that I saw, that first game that I saw, and Sinclair was 19, and they gave them their debuts in that game, another audacious thing that only Sir Alex himself would have tried. Well, I saw him in that cup final, and I can remember them. He had a graceful style about him, and that meant I followed him through his career. He went to Hibs, and I followed him through his career. I just simply liked the way he plays. He was a forward-thinking player. And Pi Garden, who was simply a goal scorer. 39 goals, I think he scored for your club, and he was always there in a penalty area at the right moment, at the right time. And of course, you won that game 3-1. But there was also something different about it, because you were refused a lap of honour. And you were refused a lap of honour because of the conduct, I think it was, of the Rangers supporters at a League Cup final, where the SFA eventually banned laps of honour. So there you got that cup. And I did not see the Celtic Dunfermline Cup final where you lost to Celtic in 65, I think it was.
Yeah.
Now, the reason for that was BBC had two commentators at that time. They had myself and George Davidson. George Davidson was the number one commentator after I had joined. And that day, when Celtic were playing Dunfermline in the cup final, Hearts were playing Kilmarnock at Tynecastle for the league title. Kilmarnock only needed a draw. Hearts needed to win. And I was given that game to do. And it was a terrible place, Tynecastle, in those days, because they had stanchions in the enclosure, which meant you had to dodge, book and dive to see the ball at times. And I remember at the end, Willie Wardle, who's the manager of Kilmarnock at that time, and who was finishing and going into journalism after that, running onto the pitch to hug Frank Beattie, the Kilmarnock captain, because they pit Hearts. I think it was a draw to each, something like that. Meanwhile, over at Celtic Park, Celtic were coming back over at Hampden Park in the final. Celtic were coming back 3 times against Dunfermline in that final, and I think it was probably Stein. I think you gained the impression I'm an admirer of Jock Stein.
Of course, yeah. Rightly so, Archie.
Because he was one of the greatest. There's no question about it. And Dunfermline had the benefit of him, and also the benefit of association with his name, continuing name with Dunfermline. And I think they should be proud that they brought this man here in the first place. And practically so, because he won them things. So, very much so. And thereafter, of course, I watched Dunfermline and various other games, and my career began to take off in different directions, in different ways. And I'll allow you to ask me if you want anything pertinent that you want to say.
Well, if you fast forward, obviously the 60s was an amazing time for the football club, most successful in our history, quite clearly. But I want to fast forward to the 1980s, when a certain Mr. Leishman started getting the club going again. And
Right.
you were a regular at East End Park in those days, weren't you?
Yes, I did a lot of games in these days. Now, at my age, and I'll be 91 in a couple of months' time, my memory isn't as good as it used to be. So I don't remember much of the detail of that particular period. I remember Leash, of course, a great personality. But I think what was important for Scottish football, and is right now, is that clubs like Dunfermline, like Motherwell, those clubs outside of the cities can survive, like St Johnstone and so on, these clubs. Very important. And what you need are big personalities, which Leash was, of course, because it's not just about tactics, it's about drive, as Rangers are discovering now, where a lack of personality has obviously affected them. So yes, Leash was great and great to interview. Always marvellous to interview. So in essence, yes, I admired them during that period.
Brilliant. Well, he's joining us for lunch just shortly, so you'll get to catch up with him. I want to rewind back to the 60s. We've obviously covered Jock Stein and his time. Another player during that era who went on to do okay was a certain Sir Alex Ferguson, who you were close to as well. So tell us a little bit about Sir Alex as a player, and then obviously as a manager.
Well, as a player, he was a goal scorer, quick feet, quick thinking, and so on. The elbows out, flying elbows, you could maybe say about him. But I have to say, I have to drift of the significant things I know about Sir Ali. I drift away, if you don't mind me, from Dunfermline just for a moment. Because the game that mattered to me with Fergie and my commentary was the Scottish Cup final between the Old Firm Rangers and Celtic. When Billy Neal scored with a header in 2 minutes to put Celtic in the lead, and they went on to win 4-0 in that game. And that was a finish of Fergie at Rangers, because he was the man who was supposed to cover Billy McNeil at that particular moment. But then I suddenly realised that Alec had a different outlook on life from other people and other managers. Because there I was in the airport in the European Cup final when Celtic were playing Feyenoord in the final. Thousands of Celtic and Feyenoord supporters were in this airport with the rain lashing down, waiting for the planes back home. Feyenoord had beaten Celtic. But amongst them all, I could see this Rangers face, Alex Ferguson. And I went up to him thinking, what the hell are you doing here? And they were all, to be fair, the Celtic supporters were giving him a roasting, but a colourful, a friendly roasting. He said, I'm just here to see games at the highest level and so on. And of course, he then went on, and I became very friendly with him. I used to sit up in the boot room with him at Pataudry, and we'd talk about all kinds of things, not just about football, but about intimate things I wouldn't even mention to you. And he told me about the time that Rangers were interested in taking him to Ibrox as a manager, because Rangers were struggling at that particular time. And he told me about his life being a Catholic. And he said, no, they wouldn't accept us, so they're not going to accept me. So that was that. And then he went on to great success because he had the same attitude as Stein had at Dunfermline. That is, they think you're provincial. Aberdeen, they think you can't come south of Perth. You're not unable to take on the West of Scotland teams like the Old Firm, even Partick Thistle and so on. You've got to get over that. And he got them over that. He gave them, he shooed out their inferiority complex and went on to win the Cup Winners' Cup in Gothenburg. And I was there that night. I didn't do the commentary that night. I was there for Breakfast Television. I was working in London at that stage for the BBC, and Breakfast Television sent me there just to report in the game. And I was on the touchline at the final whistle, and Fergie ran off after hugging the players. I was the first person he came to, and he hugged me, lifted me off my feet, and overjoyed and so on. Then, I think the following weekend, they played Rangers in the Cup final. And it went to extra time, and Aberdeen won 1-0. So I waited, came down from my commentary position, got the mic, and waited for him while he went round talking to people, "Hello, John." Then he came up to me. And I remember his first words. I said, "Well, what did you think of that?" He said, "It was a disgrace. They were a disgrace, the way they played. I don't want to see that." I thought he was talking about the Rangers. He was talking about his own player.
Yeah, it's quite an iconic interview that now, isn't it?
Oh, I couldn't, but I just carried on then, He's given me something about his own players. Well, the players didn't like it because they were watching the screen in the dressing room. Gordon Strachan, for instance, refused to go to the banquet afterwards in Gleneagles Hotel. I think they were stopping over in Gleneagles Hotel. He refused to go to it. He was so angered by it. All the players, Ole Miller couldn't believe it. Ole Miller, who's a lover of Sir Alec and a great player, as you know, simply couldn't believe it. And that was Sir Alec. Now, let me stress what I said about him hugging me as he came off the pitch in Gothenburg. I take you forward, I don't know how many months or whatever it was, maybe more than a year. The dates don't matter. What matters was the situation. Because I walked into Easter Road one day to do the Aberdeen Hibs game. And as I walked in, he suddenly launched an attack on me for what I had said about his goalkeeper, Jim Leighton, in a friendly, I think it was a friendly international against Ireland, where I think I had said, as politely as I possibly could, that Jim Leighton had thrown a couple of balls into the net, or what's the effect, and he launched this attack on me. So the one thing I couldn't do in front, because the vestibule at Easter Road was packed, I couldn't allow him to do this and just stand. So I gave him my back, and we really cursed at each other. And the Assistant Chief Constable, the Strathclyde of the Lothians, came across and said, "Gentlemen, any more of this and I'll have to take action." That's the same man who hugged me coming up for Christian Dunfermline. So they could change, like Stein, you could change in mood and so on. And many players had the same experience with Sir Alec as I had. So that was it. So, yes, you saw him here as a player, and he was a player of note, but he turned into, obviously, a great manager.
He done okay. How would you compare Jock Stein and Sir Alex? Were they very similar? And did Sir Alex learn off Stein?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I think learn is maybe not the word I would use. I think he was inspired by Stein. I think he realised what a Scottish manager could do. That here was somebody who was entirely different, who went into Celtic when Celtic were looking as if they were going nowhere. Not only did that, but changed the game, changed the attitude of people, dominated the media. He never said a word without worrying about what Jock Stein was going to say afterwards and so on. And Fergie followed the same route and thought he could take that, as he did, very successfully down to England. So I think, yes, Stein showed him the way and he followed it.
Do you think as well there was a link with Sir Alex was known for bringing through the class of 92, the kids, but Stein was also big on that, wasn't he? He done it at Dunfermline, And he also had the Quality Street guys at Celtic.
Yes, I think it was important always not just to think of the team, the first 11, but what was coming behind. And he did that. Oh, we've already mentioned a 16-year-old and a 19-year-old making a European debuts. I mean, that's incredible. And Stein could do that with, as you said, the gang he had there, young players like Kenny himself and Lou Macari and such. Yes, I think that was important. And it's a lesson to everybody. You have to take risks nowadays. And the trouble nowadays is, of course, every player has a pound sign wrapped around his neck. And that is about how people are influenced in buying a player. To use that Rangers example, spending £8 million for a striker that hardly scores a goal and so on because of reputation. I mean, that's nonsense. So, bringing on young players is vastly important. And the supporters have got to understand that. You've got to take risks. I thought your support in watching that 2-0 defeat that I saw recently, although you were 10 men, and that was a handicap, I thought they were very tolerant. I mean, supporters are entitled to get angry. Of course, they pay their money, and they're entitled to question. I'm not sure about lying down in front of a team bus. I'm not encouraging the supporters to do that. But yes, I thought we were sitting in the centre stand, and I was listening to their remarks, and they were tolerant. They realised, you've still got work to do.
It's a young squad at the moment. I think the average age on Saturday was 22. So I think the supporters are realising that.
I didn't see Saturday's game, obviously, but I think it's very important for the supporters. There has to be the Scottish supporter as a whole. I mean, there we have 3 teams beaten in Europe last week, 3 prominent teams you would expect to do reasonably well, and they're beaten. Consequently, the game that Scotland will play represents the quality of against Greece. It's really representing the future of Scottish football, because the Bayfield as well, we're in trouble.
100%. Something I wanted to touch on about Jock Stein and Scotland. Is it true that you helped him get the Scotland job?
Well, what happened was this. He was treated badly by Celtic at the end. There's no question at all about that. Some people I happen to be candid about this. Some people in Celtic Park didn't like him because of his background. He wasn't one of them. No. So, and eventually he stood up to that, and of course he overcame it, and he was marvellous in that sense. And I wrote a book about him and so on. But he had to say to himself, I've got to go. And he went. But he went unhappily. So I got word from a man called Jim Rodger. I don't know if you remember Jim Rodger, was a very prominent Scottish journalist. He was a busybody. He was in everybody's ear. He knew everything about what was going on. Nobody made a move in Scottish football without Jim Rodger knowing and reporting it. Not everything went into print, but was used from telling a manager about another manager and so on, part of the grapevine. So he said to me, he said, hey, listen, the big man wants to talk to you. Now, the big man was only Jock Stein. I said, what do you want? He said, no, you just give him a ring. And he gave me this number. Now, he was away with the Leeds team in some training camp somewhere. So I phoned this number, got the hotel, they put me through to his room. And the first thing I heard was the racing commentator in the background. He'd obviously the television set on. Now, he was a great gambler. He gambled all the time. So he said, how you doing? And I said, oh, fine. All right, but still, what's this? He said, what are you doing now? I said, I'm going to Ibrox. So the Rangers are playing something, I can't remember. I'm going to Ibrox. He said, are you doing anything to camera or something? I says, well, come on, what is it? He says, how about you saying, if the SFA contact Jock Stein, he could be interested in the Scotland job. I think I paused for about 30 seconds. And I said, what? He said, listen, you know the works. You know how to speak. So I said, all right. I phoned London. Top of the programme. Harry Carpenter introduced me straight to Ibrox. And I said, there was no messing about. I said, if the SFA lift the phone and phone Jock Stein and ask him to be the Scotland manager, they've got their man. Following morning, I'm in my bed, turn on the radio, in comes the morning news, sports news, and the presenter said, we have Jock Stein on the line from somewhere. Mr. Stein, Archie Macpherson last night said, you're going to be the next Scotland manager. You know what these they can say all kinds of things and so. 2 weeks later, he was the Scotland manager. Work that if you like.
That is amazing.
Work it out if you like.
You described him as the most compelling man you've ever met. How do you think he would do in today's game?
Well, he would survive because he was strong in personality and he was a clever man. Clever. Mischievous. You could always... He knew how to manipulate people. You know, he was very clever that way. And in that sense, he dominated. So he would survive. No doubt he would survive. But as I said at your lunch that you very kindly invited me to, the difference for him would be this. As I said in a recent game that Andy Walker was doing, I think it was St Johnstone Kilmarnock last season, mid-Scottish clubs, you couldn't be more Scottish than that. There wasn't a single Scottish player in the park. He would have to contend with that. All his boys were local. He won the European Cup with boys that were within 20 miles of Southie Park. So you have to say to yourself, yes, he would survive, but how would he do with all the foreigners that you wouldn't know? Because I think we have lost a sense of intimacy in the game now because we knew the players. We knew the schools they went to. We knew where they lived. We knew they played in the street. We knew the streets they played in and so on. Now, we've got to put up with it because there's no alternative now. It's with us. And we've got to work and understand the problems of managers and clubs with lack of money, of getting players and so on. And that's why, going back to that subject you brought up about young players, it's absolutely essential to bring them on.
Definitely. What's your thoughts on today's game?
Well, I've always got to be very careful because I lived in marvellous times, and I pointed out, 6 World Cups, 3 European trophies brought back home, and so on. And I've got to be very careful about being critical of the modern game. I think what has happened is that the money has been, players, astronomical sums of money are being paid for players outside Scotland. And I think the feeling being generated is that somehow we're a more impoverished nation. And consequently, is our game really as good as a game elsewhere? Or funnily enough, our attendances are quite good actually, which means that domestically people are still interested and how we do. That's why I like the different cups that are played for domestically only by Scottish clubs. I think that's very important to keep interest going. I'll give you an example. I use Europe, but I think it's an example of what I mean. All these minor European trophies, not the Champions League, which is a big one, but the other cups down, I thought that's a waste of time. And then I discovered when looking at Hibs were getting 23,000 in to watch these European games. Well, I think it's the same for domestic competitions. Aberdeen showed last season a Scottish club can still win something outside of Glasgow. They could still do it. Dunfermline could still win a trophy. They're all in the possibility of doing it. Domestically, I think with Europe, we can forget that. Absolutely forget that.
Hopefully we see the bus going down the high street again one day. One day soon, hopefully.
Well, you've seen it. At least you could boast about having seen it in the past. Other brands, never seen.
This is very true. How would you reflect on your career in broadcasting, journalism, etc.?
Well, as I pointed out, and I'll repeat it again, I've been very fortunate to have lived through great times. I mean, I was in Lisbon. I cannot now believe how I got to Lisbon. I was the headmaster of a school. The Director of Education refused to give me leave of absence to go for 3 days. A Labour MP, I've always been a Labour man, and the Labour MP whom I'd worked for came into the school one day. I told him I knew he was a Celtic supporter. I said, I'm not allowed to go. Leave it with me, he said. In came a letter saying, if you go and you can get a teacher. My wife was a teacher as well. She came into my place, and I got off to Lisbon to do a part of the commentary. It wasn't the whole commentary. Just have a Scottish voice and there for the BBC. So that was it. So in all of these matters, I've been very fortunate, very lucky indeed. The thing I'm very proud of, if you don't mind me saying so, I don't want to be egotistical, but I've got to be honest about this. The things that really matter are the books I've written, because they'll stay. I'll be gone shortly, probably, but the books will still be there for people to read if they want to read them.
And I'm right in saying you've wrote most of them from your humble abode in Fife. Is that correct?
I did indeed, yes. I did just on the edge of Amsterdam. I got my inspiration there. And there's a lovely, the East Nuke is a lovely part of the world, and I'm very fond of it. It's my second home. And yes, I did it. We were a caravan just overlooking the Isle of May, which was an inspiration for one of the fiction books I wrote. So to that extent, I'm partly a Fifeman.
We've adopted you, Archie. Last question. What does Dunfermline Athletic mean to you and Scottish football?
Well, it means to me an affection with a game going back to that cold, miserable night in Dunfermline, where I suddenly realised there was football outside of Glasgow, that a ground could be packed, that a man could play teenagers making their debut, and a team outside Glasgow could score 6 goals against a powerful, famous European side. And seeing my first ever commentary cup final at Dunfermline side as well, Harry Melrose scoring that goal that European night, and watching Dunfermline taking the cup, the first cup I had ever described being presented to a captain, although he wasn't allowed to do a lap about it. So all of that means that I've been very close to a real part of history. And I think the important thing is this. All our histories are mixed. I've watched all of these Dunfermline players through the years, and they've watched me through the years as well. So we're bonded.
Brilliant, Archie. Well, it's been an absolute privilege and an honour to be in your company, and thanks again for joining us.
That's very kind of you.
Thank you for listening to Walking Down the Holbeath Road, and a massive thanks to our guest, Archie Macpherson. This podcast was produced by Jan Motkiewicz and music supplied by Stuart Dusty Miller. Until next time, thanks for listening to Walking Down the Holbeath Road. We will be joined by another former par, chatting all about their time spent at East End Park.